The Midnight Selkie, Chapter 3. Kiana hummed a cheerful little tune as she flung the sheet over the clothesline. On such a nice day, she opted to skip the dryer and go straight for drying in the fresh, sunny air. Nothing beat the smell of fresh linens kissed by the sun. Behind her was the wading pool, the hose still in it as the water began to reach the brim. "Rowley, are you coming?" she called. Flip, flop, flip, flop. Raleigh stepped out, wearing yellow flippers on his feet, blue swimming trunks, a small inner tube, water wings, a mask, and a snorkel. "Mom, don't you think that maybe this is overdoing it? I feel like a real loser in all this getup." "I'm just trying to help, hon." "It's only 1 foot of water," he remarked. "I admit it would make me nervous to sit in it, but I think this is too paranoid, even for me." Kiana chuckled and hung a white undershirt with a pair of clothespins. "Then go ahead and get in without them. I was just making a suggestion." Raleigh sighed as he pulled off the water wings. He let out a small yowl as he pulled the rubber mask and snorkel from his face and dropped it into the grass. Next off was that stupid inner tube. That was embarrassing beyond embarrassing. Then it was those stupid flippers. He lifted 1 foot to unfasten the flipper, only to fall over sideways into the muddy grass. Kiana gasped a moment, but seeing that he was not really hurt, she politely covered her face as she giggled inwardly. Raleigh had a lot of whimsical comedy about him. It was just a pity that he was so serious and self-conscious to really enjoy it in himself. Finally, out of the foolish attire, he stepped up to the pool, staring down at the water as it sparkled the sky's reflection. It seemed like such jolly water, the way it jiggled from brim to brim. He could feel his hands get sweaty. He knew it was absurd to be nervous about so little water, but this wasn't the bathtub, and that water was cold. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes as he tried to give himself the pep talk that he needed. "It's all right. It's all right. It's only 1 foot of water. 12 little inches. Can't drown in that unless I dunk my head under water and I'm too dumb to come up for air. There's no fish in it. No nothing. It's just like the tub, only cold. In fact, there's more water in the tub, so this should be easier." Another long, nervous sigh. "Right. Just keep telling myself that. Now, if only I could make myself believe it." A bit longer he stared at the water. With one strong inhale, he lifted a foot and dipped his toe into the water. He shot back. It was cold. He could hear his mother stifling her laughter behind her hands. He pouted at her as she turned her back to hang another piece of laundry. She wasn't helping much. But perhaps, if he were looking at himself through her eyes, he'd be laughing too. He had to look absolutely ridiculous, carrying on in this crazy manner. He took another deep breath and plunked his foot into the water. Aside from cold, it wasn't too bad. In went the other foot. There he stood, contemplating the next move. He was standing in the wading pool. That was better than a moment ago when he was standing outside the wading pool. Progress was good, right? But simply standing there wasn't enough. He took a few more breaths before getting down to his knees. No problem. Then he sat back on his legs. Again, no problem. Finally, he sat himself down completely and rested in the pool. "Very good, Raleigh," Kiana praised. "That wasn't so difficult," he said in a sharp, breathy voice. The water was still cold, after all. "That was rather easy." "That's wonderful progress." "I could sit here all day," he chuckled. "Wading pools, no sweat. Think Dad will be impressed?" "Hard to say that," she chuckled. "He'll be glad you can do that. But impressed is a whole other matter." He glanced over at her with an amused smile. He said I'd get a reward if I could do this. Think he'll follow through? A reward? Really? This news seemed just as interesting to her as it had been to him. What reward is he going to give you? I don't know. He didn't say. He just said I had to get into the wading pool. But he said it would be something neat. Kiana sighed and rolled her eyes. Oh dear. Knowing your father, that could be any number of disasters. Raleigh made a face. I didn't think of it like that. Well, who knows? He may pull something off this time, she laughed. The sounds of the tavern seemed to drown down into a drone as the late afternoon, early evening crowd made their conversation. Raleigh wiped a cloth idly over the counter. He seemed rather absent, lost more in his own thoughts than the job of which he was supposed to be tending. Being underage, he couldn't really work. But this was a family business, or part of it, and he was able to help out for a little pocket cash. However, he was not carrying out such duties at the moment. Only slightly could he hear the muffles of conversations bubbling about him. Raleigh, Kiana called lightly, trying to get his attention. Look at him, one of the waitresses chuckled. He's completely spaced out. Maybe he's looking at the new waitress, came the suggestions from the second. Is she out there? Kiana asked, looking around and getting on her toes in hopes of seeing the new waitress. She couldn't see her from this spot, so it was rather unlikely that she was what Raleigh was so interested in. Raleigh! The first waitress shouted in the boy's ear, startling him and making him jolt. Earth to Raleigh! What are you doing? Huh? Did you say something, Miss Sarah? He asked. Who are you daydreaming about, boy? She asked. Daydreaming about? Huh? You were spaced out so far I could see you on Venus, kid. I wasn't spaced out, Raleigh insisted. You were. Trish, wasn't he like all buggy-eyed and zombie-like? Sarah asked the second waitress. Lights were on, but nobody was home, Trish confirmed. Kiana chuckled. The girls were young, paying their way through community college, so they still had some teenage spunk left in them. It intrigued them to see a boy Raleigh's age willing to be put to work in a marina diner rather than enjoy the beach. Raleigh was a busboy. It was an easy job for a boy his age. It was a very popular spot for fishermen and other boat enthusiasts to gather in the evenings after long days on the water. Sometimes the White Whale Tavern even saw commercial fishermen returning from their long days away at sea. It was uncommon for Raleigh's classmates to be in this place. That was why he loved it so much. There was the option of walking the beach or going to the mall, or hanging out at the park. But all those places had water. The beach had the sea. The park and the mall both had fountains. Children were cruel and had very little sympathy for people who had problems. He knew for a fact that if he had met any of the other children, he risked a total relapse into extreme aquaphobia. He'd take a complete throw backwards, destroying his small progression forward. He knew if he saw any of his classmates, they'd get together to pick him up and throw him into the water out of malicious spite. It wasn't only traumatic, but humiliating, even to people without his phobia. No, it was better to just stay among the adults. In fact, even this was part of his therapy. Since so many seagoers gathered in this place, it meant they'd compete for the best tale. And sailors knew how to tell fantastic yarns. Raleigh had hoped that the submersion in such lore and competition could raise his enthusiasm, perhaps. If he could get excited about hearing tales of the sea, perhaps he'd be more eager to see such wonders himself. Perhaps the enthusiasm would become so great it would overcome the fear. At least, these were his hopes. Is there something on your mind, Raleigh? Kiana asked, starting a fresh pot of coffee. Is it a girl? Sarah teased. It's not a girl, Raleigh insisted. It sure seemed like Sarah was like an annoying big sister. He wasn't exactly sure if he liked the notion or not. He was an only child, after all, and had no idea how a true sibling would have affected his life, if at all. But she was the closest thing to finding out. However, in Sarah's favor, she was a hard-working and trustworthy sort. Trish was a more timid girl by comparison, but no less trustworthy. I'm wondering when and if Dad follows through with his reward of his. Kiana messed his hair. Do what you do for you, son. Do it because you know it will make you a better person. Don't focus on what other rewards that are of a lesser value. I know, he replied, but I'm still curious. Dad's just that kind of person, you know. I never know what he's thinking. I never know what he's talking about, Sarah chimed in, placing a hand on her hip. A ding caught her attention suddenly. Order up, from the kitchen. Ah, that'd be me, she replied, taking up the baskets and setting them on a tray. She scuttled past the others as she headed into the lobby to deliver the order. Kiana poured a cup of coffee, now freshly brewed, and mixed it to her liking. She was rather heavy on the cream and sugar. One could almost joke that she had a little coffee in her cream and sugar, rather than the other way around. For her preference, it was amazing that her teeth were so perfectly pearly. After all, mouthwash, brushing, and flossing could only do so much against a regularly sugary diet. Riley, look alive, she said as she brought the mug to her lips and blew to cool it. Riley was pulled completely from his thoughts and began to scan the lobby. 3 tables were going vacant and were in need of bussing. So he dunked the rag back into the sanitizer bucket and grabbed an empty dish bin. He then trotted across the lobby, setting the bin in a pull-out chair. Most of the items on the table were of a paper sort, but still needed to be separated from the plastic cups and baskets, and of course after-meal coffee mugs. This was, in a sense, a rewarding position. Due to laws, Raleigh was unable to wait tables, but this simple position gave him the opportunity to mingle among the remaining tables and eavesdrop on the sailors and fishermen. Even that could equal a hit or miss. Sometimes the stories were basic, simple, and dull. But there was always at least one of those the one that got away tales. After hearing so many, one would think they'd get repetitive and old. But those who would dare suggest such a thing were obviously ignorant of the sport of yarning. So, the boy tries to cast, right? One of the hobby fishermen chuckled to a comrade across from him. He slings the rod back and latches onto some guy's arm, and the poor man falls backwards when Duncan casts out. Ouch, his companion replied. Some people were just not meant to fish. I know the feeling, though. My nephew, you know, he lives way out there in the desert, and he seems to think that it would be very easy to hop on a boat and master the water. Poor land-loving sand fool, the first fisherman laughed. So, he has me take him out on my boat and thinks that he'll just go to it naturally. He makes a mess out of 3 of my rods and loses about a quarter of his bait. And he only catches 1 fish the whole time we're out there. Oh, what a pathetic thing to see, the first fisherman cackled. Indeed, and it only gets worse. He falls off the boat and nearly tears off the rudder. No sea legs at all whatsoever. Raleigh wiped the table, finding no real adventure in these stories, and moved on to the next one. It was along a wall, between 2 sets of occupied tables. There was rarely a shortage of patrons to this establishment. It was the place to come if you thought you had any business on the water. The conversations were only slightly better on this side, but not by much. At the table to the right of the one Raleigh was bussing sat a local legend, Admiral Nye Porter. He was a veteran of the area with fantastic tales of all sorts. He knew these parts and the seas like the back of his hand. He had been a Navy man when he was young, and now he lived in the old lighthouse, collecting fairy tales and stories of adventure and danger. Many of his stories were true, or had truth in them, with the fabricated yarn attached. No one questioned him, and no one passed up the opportunity to hear him speak. He was the most stereotypical seagoer one can imagine. He could pass as Captain Ahab or a well-fashioned pirate at will. He had a twitch in one eye, causing him to squint it, bringing to mind characters like Popeye. And indeed, though he kept them covered, his hairy arms were covered in tattoos of anchors and bare-breasted mermaids. On his chest was a tattoo of his proud and sunken lady, Odyssey Otimo. What old-fashioned mariner was without his ink mark? He always clenched a corncob pipe in his teeth, spending more time simply holding it than smoking anything. He spoke with a raspy voice, passing him off as the local buccaneer. "Yeah, it was a bad year for the beach," he growled. "2 dolphins and some seals washed up dead on the shores within the last 3 months. It's a real shame. Something bad is a-brewing." "Bad like how?" Raleigh caught himself saying. As Nye turned to glance at him, he covered his mouth and gasped. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop." "What's so bad at coming?" he asked back. "You want to know what it is?" I... "Don't grow pale, boy. A storm is a-brewing, and it's going to be a big one. The biggest storm we've seen in a while. The biggest one since I was a boy myself." "Like a big hurricane?" "Not on your life, boy. It'll be a big tide and a big rain. Any boat foolish enough to go to sea will be swallowed alive by it. It is a black water." "Black water? I don't understand." Nye lifted his hat to scratch his scruffy white head and then replaced it. "Ah, you are but a tyke. You've not seen anything like it. Black water is when the water becomes so dangerous, even for the most veteran of seamen. Not even I would be so bold as to ride out a storm that big. The water will go black as the clouds swallow the sun. The waves shall tower over even my lighthouse. But seamen have been braving storms, even on the shore, for centuries. But it can really put a hold on the lives of men who depend on that lifestyle." "Will it hurt the fishing?" Raleigh asked. "Ah, that depends. It can stir up a lot of good new fishing. But with forces so strong, it could kill off many fish as well. So we may be finding our beaches loaded with lots of dead fish and dolphins. Maybe even seals and whales. But if it is anything like when I was a boy, it'll wash up some other surprises as well." "Surprises?" Nye chuckled, looking at his empty mug and handing it to him. "Fetch me a refill, boy. Finish your duty. If you want to know about the last mighty storm, you come sit here, and old Ravyn Porter will fill you in." Raleigh blinked, staring at the mug before taking it and heading towards the waitress station. "Mom, Ravyn Porter wants more coffee." His mother arched a brow at him, staring at the mug before taking it from him. However, this was not as odd as she had acted it to be. The Admiral was quite the patron, and knew everybody in town. He was like a grandfather to everybody. Some saw him as the old crank, and some saw him as the grand storyteller. He seemed to have the town held firmly between his thumb and forefinger. But in a place like this, that wasn't as bad a thing as it sounded. Despite his less than fluffy disposition, Nye was very interested in the town, its people, and the grand air that had been so for countless years. He was a protector of the heritage and the people in it. "Hurry and finish busting those tables, Raleigh," she finally said. "I'll take the coffee back out to him." He gave a nod and rushed to finish cleaning the tables. Unfortunately, it was a busy time of day, and he was unable to return to the Admiral. It only fueled his curiosity and anxiety. He worked faster and harder, wanting to find some downtime to return to the table before Nye left for the evening. He would watch every few minutes, and Nye would be drinking another cup of coffee or another soft drink. He was only allowed so much alcohol. He hated to slur when he spoke, so he always limited himself to a few shots and 2 or 3 good beers. That was enough to make his mood lighter, but still keep him alert. It was hours before any sort of relief was coming to the White Whale Tavern. It was getting dark outside, and the restaurant was clearing out of its evening crowd. They'd be closing soon. Raleigh felt a sense of defeat and disappointment. He was tired, and he was sure that he'd missed his chance at hearing the old admiral speak. He was amazed, though, at the enthusiasm he had felt. He had been determined. This was the sort of thing he had hoped for. He knew it was rather ironic. He wanted to hear this tale of black water and a great storm, even though it may very well have fueled his fear of the sea, rather than cure it in any way. But he still couldn't help but feel his heart tug at the story untold, and he had missed it. After being sure that all the baskets and cups were put away, Raleigh left the dishwasher to finish the pots and pans. He let out a yawn and came around to the waitress station to wait for his mother. She would be relieving the waitresses and counting the night's money soon. But before that, they were preparing for the morning's prep work. It also made their mornings go much easier. He helped himself to a styrofoam cup full of cola, a lid, and a straw, and glanced into the lobby. He'd have his choice of places to sit with the crowd gone. It was much to his surprise, however, that he saw Admiral Nye Porter still sitting in his place. He was sipping coffee like he had been earlier. But why hadn't Raleigh seen him a few minutes before? It suddenly dawned on him that if he would drink that much coffee, he'd be in the restroom countless times throughout the night. Slowly, Raleigh approached the lone sailor, straw in his mouth. Nye glanced at him and gave him a crooked smile, showing his yellowing teeth. "Ah, there you are, boy." "You're still here?" "I never told you that story. I said I'd tell you when you were done your duty." He slammed a hand on the table. "Sit here, boy. I see you listening in on those fishermen and sort. They ain't got much in way of good tales. Many know some, but they don't know one at all. Not like I do." Raleigh scooted himself onto the seat, resting his elbows on the table. Nye pushed his mug away and looked the boy over. He said nothing. This, of course, only made Raleigh much more antsy. "You're not a sailor, are you? Don't like boats?" "How can you tell that?" "You don't interrupt the grander tales, made up or not," Nye laughed. "You have this strange look to you. I can see it a mile away." "I guess I'm a landlubber," he shrugged. Nye reached over to tap him upside the back of the head. Raleigh choked a moment on his cola, rubbing his head as he stared wide-eyed at the old man. The confusion was so evident on his face that he needn't say a word. "Don't say such a thing," Nye spat. "You are not." "But I am. I'm wanting to go into the water," he finished. Raleigh was rather astounded at such a thing to be said. He hadn't ever been really close to Nye. No one was. He was such an enigmatic and private old man. So how did he dare to think he knew anything about Raleigh? "Landlubbers try to tame the water, and they give up. They can live without the heavenly waves of the mysterious blue. But he who was born to be in the water, they cannot escape it, no matter what." "I'm afraid of the water," he said quietly. "I have aquaphobia." "How dare you utter the A word?" Nye gasped. "Afraid or aquaphobia?" Either one! Either one is a horrible thing to say. But one is worse than the other. This is no place for a landlubber." "I told you, I'm afraid to be in the water. But this is where my parents want to be. I can't do much of anything. I don't have family elsewhere. Everybody is attached to the area." Nye gave him a grin. "That is exactly it. Landlubbers are not born of mariners. Seamen, they may take leave of the sea for any number of years, but it calls to them, boy. It calls to them. She, the sea, she born you from her sands, boy. You will never escape that. This afraid stuff, it's not forever. Seamen do not fear the sea forever." "That sounds hopeful," Raleigh replied. I hate being afraid. I've been trying really hard to get over it. It's engulfed my whole life.
Engulfed? A boy your age uses such pretty words,
Nye teased.
You're into books, aren't you?
You could say that. I don't like to hang out, so I'm normally in a library when I'm not here.
What do you read about?
Different things.
About the water?
Nye chuckled. Raleigh blushed a little, which only caused more of a chuckle from the Admiral.
I figured so. You cannot escape it. It's in your blood.
I want to overcome it one day.
You will. I can promise you that. I've lived in this place a long time. In fact, longer than anyone else. I know what I'm talking about.
You said something about a big storm, Raleigh said, changing the topic. What was it you were going to tell me?
I was very young at the time, boy.
Raleigh. My name is Raleigh.
A long time ago,
he continued, as if not paying attention to the insisted introduction.
This area had such a natural beauty. It was much more than it is now. There were only a few scattered houses, but mostly it was beach and woods. But a strange thing was happening off in the sea. A strange bit of weather was forming, planning to move into full attack. Yet no one knew it was coming. Far off in the open sea, things went about as normal. Schools of fish wafted through the waters, hiding in reefs off the coast, and forming tight bonds as they scooted themselves into the open sea. Whales were migrating through, dolphins were chasing the bounty, and seals were just starting to come to the area.
I thought seals were always here, Raleigh interrupted.
No, they came in by accident. You see, there was a huge migration. The place where the seals were, it wasn't suitable anymore. So they moved for new territory. They brought quite an entourage with them. Where they were going, that was then, and always will be, a mystery. But mark my words, boy, the open ocean is an unforgiving place. It's more deadly than any desert or jungle the land could ever hope to offer. The clouds then, one day, swallowed up the sky, turning it darker than any night. With no light, the water seemed to turn completely black. The sea then became rough, lifted in great tides and waves. Everything for miles throughout and underwater were tossed and flung about. The very depths were turned upside down. Countless amounts of sea life were injured or killed. It was as if the very bowels of hell had opened in the abyss, and the behemoth and Leviathan came forth to swallow the world in water.
By now, Raleigh was enthralled in this tale. His eyes had grown as wide as saucers. His mouth hung open like a big codfish. The straw rested on his bottom lip, but no more soda was being sucked from the cup. He was far too focused on listening with every ounce of his being. The Admiral sure knew how to tell an enchanting story. It was as if he was there. He could feel every part of his being pulled into this tale. It was an odd feeling. He feared it, and yet he thirsted for more. Hours and hours into the night, the waves battered against anything and everything for miles. By the following morning, all the shores and beaches were littered with injured and dead animals. But Admiral, that happened after the storm. You said the beached animals was a sign the storm was coming, Raleigh pointed out.
Yes, but the storm had given hints of its presence,
Nye stated.
Some animals were already being thrown or led to the beaches. They get a taste of the storm to come and are hit with inflictions of rough seas. It's a feeding frenzy out there. If you go out now, you will see the sharks swirling about in those waters. They know what's coming. If they can survive the chaos, they will dine in a feast that has not been seen in decades.
And it's coming soon?
Very. Haven't pinpointed the exact time. But it is near, boy. Earlier this year, we saw 2 dead dolphins, 2 dead seals. And about 3 months ago, we found an injured seal on the beach. Young pup it was.
So the storm years ago brought the seals?
They were tossed onto the shores of Mirror Rock and along this beach. They thrived here after recovering from the storm.
Raleigh was finally able to take a large sip of his soda. He let out a little burp and wiped his face. This lack of manners didn't seem to bother the old man in the slightest. Mirror Rock. My grandpa used to go camping out there.
That he did. It was a popular place for boys of that generation to camp.
People say it's enchanted, Raleigh chuckled.
People say all sorts of things, boy, he replied. Every land has its folklore and mystery. That's just something that human beings bring to the lands they inhabit, and the worlds they don't. It's how people connect with the lands and other forces of nature. It's a tradition that has gone on since the dawn of time.
All right, Admiral Yak-a-Lot, Sarah chuckled, coming over to the table. It's time for us to lock the doors and head out.
Saucy lass you are,
Admiral Night Porter laughed.
You'd make a fine fishmonger's wife. You'd make him a wealthy man.
Are you saying that I'm loud and obnoxious? She gasped.
Quiet, quiet,
he replied, getting up with a good-natured laugh.
You see, boy, this is what I mean. Even she is built as a seaside girl. No landlubber will ever be able to tame a mariner's daughter. The tongue is too sharp, like the fins of a fish.
Are you filling his head full of your crazy mumbo-jumbo? Sarah accused.
You'll see,
he chuckled, walking past her and leaving a small wad of money by the register before heading out. Trish came behind him and locked the door, turning around to face Kiana and Sarah. That man is crazy. But he's one of the most respected men in town, regardless, Kiana pointed out. Whenever someone is lost at sea around these parts, he's normally the one to pinpoint their place. He's saved many lives both in and out of that lighthouse. I guess that entitles him to be a little eccentric, Sarah shrugged. Anyway, are we all done? The dishwasher done left already. Did you count out your tips? Kiana asked. We have to get the credit card tips from you, she replied. Tracy left before she could put hers together, though. She really is a noob. Teenagers. No matter, Sarah. I'll just put hers aside for her tomorrow. Kiana began to go through the slips. She counted out the money and presented Trish and Sarah with the remainder of their tips. That's it, girls. I'll close up shop and reset the drawer. You two get a good rest. You got it, Mrs. Stock. Trish smiled. Sarah replied with a little salute before she unlocked the door and let her coworker out. Raleigh came behind them to lock the door once more, securing the establishment until his mother was ready to leave. Mom, do you think Admiral Night Porter is right about the storm coming in? I can't say for sure. It's said that people who are really familiar with the natural world around them can predict events like that, but it's hit or miss, just like everything else in the world, she explained as she started to count out the money again. He was saying that the seals came in during a storm several years back. Kiana perked and glanced at him. He said that, did he? He should know, I suppose. He's been here a long time and knows every organism around. Probably he knows more about the sea life here than your father. Are there a lot on Marrow Rock? They come and go around here. At least, that's what everyone else says. Where do they disappear to? Seals hunt in the open ocean, too, Kiana stated, so you won't always see them on the beaches. But it's very common to see many seals around Marrow Rock. It's uninhabited by humans, so it's a prime place for seals to relax without being bothered. She seemed to go silent before shaking her head. Be silent now, Raleigh. I have to count the bank. She lowered her head, frowning as she punched the numbers into the calculator and wrote them down on a sheet. Raleigh cocked his head to the side. He couldn't understand his mother's sudden blues. She seemed really distracted and bothered, and he wasn't sure if it was something he had said, or what he had said. But her sadness made a sense of sadness fall upon him as well. He was tempted to ask about it. However, her stern order had made him unwilling to chance her mood, so he left it at that. turning to look out the window into the dark gravel parking lot and listening to her silently shift the papers and money about.